Make that big boss less special. It ain't no game, but they saying welcome to the second level. Second level. Second level gaming. Second level.
Nice shot.
Cold Iron is an anomaly of a game. As far as I know, it's the world's first puzzle dueling shooter game. When I initially read that, I had this image in my head of an escape the room type game where you would be using your gun to solve the puzzles. As it turns out, I was completely off track. Cold Iron is a story of supernatural vengeance set in the Wild West and, well, a few other interesting locales too. The basic premise is something along the lines of your father being the greatest gunslinger in the West until he had you. Then he decided his shooting days were over. However, eventually, his past caught up with him and, well, you can imagine the rest. The one thing that your father had to his advantage was a gun called Cold Iron, which was supernatural in its abilities and seemed almost bloodthirsty to a fault. You have now picked up where your father left off and find yourself going down quite the rabbit hole in order to keep yourself and Cold Iron alive. This game is played entirely with a single move controller, but due to its simplicity, this works surprisingly well. The basic premise of the game is in 3 stages and is as such. Number 1, holster your weapon by aiming the move controller down. Number 2, wait for the sound of the bell. Number 3, aim and shoot before your opponent shoots you.
All right.
Sounds simple enough, right? Well, it is, until the puzzle part kicks in. What they mean by puzzles in this game is that your dueling opponents start to get a little more complicated as you go on.
All right.
What starts as a standard Western theme soon turns quite bizarre as you find yourself taking out mages and robots and much more interesting targets in general. Each opponent has their thing. For example, one of your opponents is a sniper. Right before the bell goes off, she disappears in a whiff of smoke and takes an advantageous position on you. Either you catch where she landed and watch and wait for the bell, which with the slightly blurry graphics is not easy at a distance, or you wait for her laser sight to start honing itself in on your location and act quickly in order to put her down before she can take the shot. As a further example, one opponent is a mage who summons 2 alternative versions of himself, but there's something a little off about the other 2 in each of the first of 5 rounds. Maybe their pant legs are a different color, or their hood isn't quite right. You have to determine which one is the real one before the bell goes off so that you can snap and shoot the mage before he blasts you into oblivion.
Not bad.
There are 3 opponents per area, and each area ends with a boss fight, which are thoroughly enjoyable and usually quite a bit harder than the standard opponents. And after the boss fight, the world is over. You get to let off a bit of steam by shooting watermelons in a fun bonus round that will put your shooty fruity skills to the test. So is cold iron worth its weight in, well, iron? I'd say so. The idea is unique, and despite the occasional frustrations in the trial and error phase of trying to figure out the trick to beating your opponent, it always pays off well when you actually nail them. I can't tell you how pumped I was when I finally beat a robot soldier enemy that I literally could only listen to the sound cues for to figure out where to fire. Elation was an understatement.
Lights out.
The only real letdown is the graphical fidelity on PSVR. I played on a Pro, and even though it is entirely serviceable, some fights, like the aforementioned sniper duel, were made extra difficult by the lack of clarity at distance. It wasn't enough to ruin the fun, though. Not that many enemies will use distance to their advantage.
Nice.
Whilst short and sweet, the replayability is quite high. Obviously, you feel like a badass during these duels, and there are multiple ranks to try and attain, as well as statues for you to collect for your efforts. It has a very easy pick up and play vibe. The challenge does ramp up in a similar nature to Super Hot as you progress, but despite having a semi-decent comic book style story and a unique idea, it never feels quite as well polished as a game like Super Hot does. Luckily, the majority of issues I have with this title are easily patched, and the most important core element, the gameplay, is solid as a rock.
Cold iron. It seemed like nothing could stand in your way.
I enjoyed my time with Cold Iron, and whilst I don't think it'll be breaking any top 5 lists this year, I do think it's a worthy addition to the PSVR catalog and a lot of fun to play. Check out our gameplay video to see if you're up for the challenge. Thanks for watching.
You had a trick up your sleeve, too. Was it over?
It ain't no game, but they saying welcome to the second level.